So the models have to reflect that adjustment as you go into the analysis, and then that comes out in the benefits result and in the output part of the simulation. So that's another piece of the equation that is still in its very early stages of being understood, but we do have some innovative work like Paul's that has managed to capture that. Let me just jump ahead a couple of slides. The report that we put together was for the CSP Alliance. It's available for free. It's basically a literature survey. It was intended to be an intermediate sort of study between Paul's fairly technical work and the ability to convey those results to non-experts in power system modeling. So this study is available for free for download. We are actually about to put out the next version, so it's worth waiting a few weeks to go and download this. So we will have version 2, which will incorporate Paul's most recent work, as well as any other studies we could find out there to help flesh out the picture of CSP with thermal storage value. And then finally, just for fun, I have some illustrative slides. Paul mentioned ramps. This is a very famous slide now that's being used by the California ISO, where I used to work. This slide, basically, this is a high ramp day in the spring. And this slide was generated, I know, because I generated early versions of this chart when I was there. This is a more recent version. But basically, this is the actual net load ramp curve based on the actual penetration of renewables in California year by year. So this is the commercial online dates going out to 2020, and they put the energy in the model and graph the net load curve. And I think why this slide has become very popular in California and elsewhere is because it very nicely illustrates the progression of this dip that happens in the middle of the day as you get additional PV and to some extent wind. So you see that, let's see, I'll get this pointer working. Anyway, you see. You mean this?
Right, no, right here. This one works.
Okay. You see where we are now, roughly 2012, 2013, 2014. We're still following the curve, the conventional curve. This, by the way, in this March day, you know, the peak is later in the day in California. But you can see that by 2015, with all the PV projects expected to come online in the next couple of years, the curve dips down to here, and then year by year down to 2020. Around this area, this is a CAISO chart. Around 2016 to 17 is when they're raising the alarm about overgeneration conditions. And these are the type of conditions that Paul has pointed out in some of his earlier research would obviously advantage CSP with thermal storage with its ability to dispatch out of those intervals. So what we did for this CSP Alliance report, we didn't have Paul's most recent study yet. So what we did for that report was we took this day and we created a simpler dispatch model. We took a hypothetical addition to the CSP thermal storage portfolio. We added 2 and then 4 and then 6 hours of storage to what at that time was a projection of 2,500 megawatts of CSP in California. So just to illustrate the effect on those ramp curves, we added those amounts we created a simple dispatch model, and we put the thermal energy to minimize ramps. And this is what it looks like. So what you see here is, as we added the thermal energy, this was the original ramp, the green line, and this is essentially, I think, the same day as you saw on the prior curve, because these are from public data sets, by the way. You can generate these graphs by yourself if that's of interest to you. And then we added thermal storage, and you can see the smoothing effect on those ramps in the morning and the evening as you add the thermal storage. And also the flattening, well, the reason that's happening is because of the flattening of the solar curve, a pyramid. And this next slide just sort of zooms in on that to show that effect as you return back, you return back to a little bit more of a current operating state that the California ISO has to operate to as compared to the more extreme ones that it may have to look at in the future. And we have some additional graphs in the report that show other operating conditions that we generated out of the public data sets and show, for example, rapid swings where the CSP thermal storage can smooth out a rapid swing in net load. Anyway, I'll leave this on the screen just for discussion purposes.
Thank you, Udi. Udi's been instrumental in us understanding all these different attributes and working with Paul in structuring the direction of all the analysis that's been done. So thanks, Udi. Okay, so let me jump back to our first question is basically what are the attributes that CSP potentially offers and get a perspective. Elaine, if I can put you on the spot, Elaine works for SMUD, which is a municipal utility, and so they're sort of separate from the investor-owned utilities that connect to the CAISO. So, Elaine, why don't you give us your perspective on the attributes here? Can you, Elaine, why don't you come up here and I guess they'll turn our microphones on here in a second. Okay. Whichever. Your choice.
This is, hello? Yeah, great. This is a panel session, so I'll sit here with my other panelists. Good morning. Other than these technical difficulties, I'm happy to be here, and thank you for the opportunity to speak. I want to talk a little bit about SMUD before I answer the question. SMUD is a publicly owned utility. I'm here to sort of bring the perspective of utilities in general, but really I'm probably going to focus more on the publicly owned utility, the POU side. We do have an elected board. Our RPS is now being sort of enforced, regulated by the California Energy Commission. So we talk to them quite a bit. We serve 1.4 million people in Sacramento County, including the capital and a little bit part of Placer. We have about 6,000 customers. We have an aggressive renewable supply goal. In addition to our 33% by 2020, we also have a green pricing program that our target is about 4.4%. So SMUD's renewable goal in general is 37.4%. And currently we are at almost 24% renewables in our portfolio. And our target really is 20%. So we're above our target. We also have a greenhouse gas reduction goal of 10% of our 1990 levels by 2050. So our 2012 portfolio is approximately 56% biogas, 20% each in wind and small hydro, and we also have a small 4% of solar PV. Now, to answer the question from a utility perspective, our focus is keeping the lights on. So we value CSP and thermal storage because of the potential that both Udi and Paul have mentioned. So I really won't go into that, but the list is up here on the board. So what SMUD feels is for our future generation needs, we need to include zero low carbon resources, peaking resources, and flexible resources for integration of variable renewable energy. So options for SMUD that we are looking at is actually pump storage using renewable energy, biomass gasification, biomethane, compressed air energy storage is an option that we're looking at using our wind resources to do the pumping. And also we're looking seriously at CSP with thermal storage. Sacramento is a good site for CSP because we have expected summer output similar to a plant in the Mojave and an annual output similar to southern Spain. SMUD's integrated resource plan also recognizes CSP thermal storage potential and supporting land suitability assessments to look at land and to study and procure land for a future large CSP plant in the Sacramento area around the Sacramento area, approximately 100 to 200 megawatts. SMUD is particularly interested in CSP thermal storage hybrid with one of our combined cycle power plants. We have a 530 megawatt combined cycle power plant called Consumnes Power Plant, CPP. And we think that a hybrid of that has the potential to allow SMUD to increase reliability and schedulable capacity during summer months. We also think that it can increase the total capacity by a small amount during the rest of the year for SMUD. This combination hybrid can augment and protect the output of our CPP from the various variation of solar during the day, and in general enhances the operation of CPP. So SMUD as a utility does value CSP for its potential benefits. Thank you.
Thanks. Anybody else want to make any comments about the attributes? Excuse me. Okay, go ahead, dude.
I'll just make a very quick comment. I think each region is a little different, and obviously there are big differences between valuation in a restructured market like California and vertically integrated utilities. There's actually a very good survey of solar valuation that was done by Lawrence Berkeley National Labs. And of the southwestern U.S. utilities, I recommend that as a good survey of how the different utilities were doing solar valuation, including CSP with thermal storage. The one thing I'll say about that survey is it doesn't really capture the complexity of the California PUC type of processes that are underway now. And also certain features in California have not yet been allowed to be considered by the vertically integrated utilities, I mean by the investor-owned utilities. For example, integration costs comparisons are not yet allowed formally in the analysis, but the PUC, when BrightSource took its thermal storage projects in, it did give them a credit. It gave them a credit range of $1 to $8 for avoided integration costs. But that process of valuing those integration costs and looking out over multiple years to credit long-term investments like a CSP plan are not yet formally in place.
Okay, so Udi brings up the issue that we're going to go to. The next two questions that Fred had prepared for our panel basically is how might these attributes be monetized, and how could utility RFOs be structured to request these attributes, and what role do policymakers have in that? So I work for a developer. I believe in my heart that there's value here that CSP offers, but there's nothing in the marketplace that pays for that. So how can we change this? The California has the market price reference, and it values power from PV as much as CSP, and utilities have no incentive to buy one or the other. So if they choose PV because it's cheaper, they're making the right choice undoubtedly for their ratepayers. So can we get some David?
So first of all, I would say this is really a decision that largely rests with the Public Utilities Commission in California, and in my view, it does deserve to be monetized. I feel like we're talking about a preferred resource here that can provide essentially a similar function to a gas peaker or a combined cycle in those late evening hours. One thing I would point out, as we look at, so PV on just a straight up PV versus CSP without storage, CSP without storage is going to have a hell of a time competing. We had a 80 megawatt procurement earlier this summer of PV at 6.9 cents a kilowatt hour. So, which is the lowest price we've seen so far for PV. And my view is there is actually still room for substantial cost reduction in the large scale PV space. So head-to-head competition is very difficult. However, and one other point I'd make is just looking at what the trend in PV right now, almost all the crystalline PV that's going online is on single-axis trackers, which means it's producing later into the evening. And as of this summer, it looks now like thin film PV, which had been predominantly fixed tilt, the efficiency of those modules has now reached the price point or the level where it makes sense for that application also to be on tracking. So looking ahead, basically, I think what we're going to see is all PV is going to be on trackers, so it's going to be producing about 30% more juice than it would otherwise be. And even in particular locations where it's intermittent, if you get enough of that, statewide, the curve is going to be smoother, and I guess the bell will be wider is the best way to understand that. So, but at the end of the day, PV can't do what CSP can in terms of storage. So I think there's a huge value here. I mean, you look at what the Public Utilities Commission just did, also last week, a 1.3 gigawatt storage plan has been proposed. I think it's likely to be adopted. In some ways, I mean, this is just as valuable, but it has yet to be monetized.
From a utility perspective, in general, we're neutral to what renewable energy resources and technologies that we use to meet our compliance goals. So we typically, particularly with SMUD, we're a publicly owned utility, so we look at the benefits to our ratepayers and to our region in general. So we do look at environmental benefits and that type of thing, but unless we're required through compliance reasons, we look towards finding the most reliable and least expensive renewable energy for our customers. So I think really the focus should be or could be could be in the regulatory arena. Utilities won't do this.
So in our experience in the monetizing issue, it has a very, for the California IOUs that are subject to the PUC, valuation has a very specific structure. It's actually in the, it's in the bid protocols. Did I just lose it? No, okay. So it follows the form. There's a formula. It's called we've called it a net system cost formula. It's basically bid costs minus benefits. So on the cost side of the equation is your bid cost, potentially your integration cost, although that hasn't been captured yet, and your transmission cost. And then on the benefit side of the equation, it's your energy benefits, your capacity benefits, and your ancillary service benefits. The PUC did listen to us as CSP developers in getting features like ancillary services into the mix. They didn't listen to us yet on the integration cost issue because that is so contentious. But that's, so the comparison is then you take each resource that's bid into your RFO and you compare it on this basis. And if CSP with thermal storage for the particular year that they're buying makes the cut in terms of beats out a PV project, then that's how you monetize the benefits. It's a credit towards your system. Now, I heard at one point of developers asking for premiums for these services, and I never was able to have a discussion like that with a utility because it's so much more expensive than PV. You can't really go in there and ask for even more payments on top of the cost because you just simply won't get into the mix. So every structure I've ever seen has to do with monetizing benefits on a net cost basis. The only other piece I'd put out there is, sometimes we have discussions about if you are in a market that, in a region that has a wholesale market, which has specific markets for energy, ancillary services, capacity, it's not impossible to believe that you could disaggregate these attributes and sell your renewable energy on one front, sell your capacity, sell your ancillary services, sell your energy. That would introduce another level of risk to the transaction. You'd have to find partners that are willing to sign those contracts over longer periods of time for some of those services, and some of those contracts don't really exist, so you might have to take some risk. But if you look out at a system like this that's undergoing a lot of changes, and you believe that there's a higher value than Paul has estimated to some of these services, you may want to take some risk and leave some of those attributes for sales other than to your utility buyer directly through the contract. So that's another possibility.
There's been a lot of discussion about ancillary services. What is the size of this market, say, in California?
Well, it's a very small market. Regulation is on average about 700 megawatts per hour. And there's a lot of certified regulation capacity in California. The advantage of CSP with thermal storage, and this is another outcome of Paul's study, is that it has no cost to provide that regulation because you're charging off the solar field, and so you essentially have a free fuel source in your tanks, and you can provide your services from that. So unlike unlike in other types of electrical storage devices, you don't have the cost of charging and then improve, having a net benefit by discharging and providing services. And Paul's study did show that when you add CSP with thermal storage, it's always in the supply mix for regulation. But then the question is, how deep is that market, and will prices be sustainable as you get more resources like this in the mix?
You also mentioned that we need to look at the ability to do net system cost to evaluate these different benefits. That isn't the way the market currently works. David, maybe you could suggest how would that happen? What is it going to take to be able to get contracts placed where we can do it in this way?
Yeah, it's a tough nut to crack. I think the temptation is always to compare directly to, gas, but again, this is a preferred resource, and I think this is sort of the, what you might call a clean peaker, which is exactly what we'd like to see. So this is really, I think this rests largely with the Public Utilities Commission, and there's, I think 2014 will be a year of big decisions there. The biggest one being in residential and commercial rate design, where there's going to be a lot of restructuring. But I think, this issue has an opportunity to get its day in court there next year.
Paul, do you?
Let me make one quick comment about California, because it's such an interesting market and very complicated. And you really have to be on the inside of it to have a sense of what's likely to happen. And even if you are on the inside of it, you may find it hard to get a sense of that. But let me just tell you a challenge that CSP with thermal storage does face in California and what might help with that challenge. And that challenge is that the utilities have contracted for all the renewable energy that they need to 2020. At the same time as the system features that we've been discussing here are showing up, the ramping issues and so forth, there's a new window now of buying flexibility. So for the next 2 or 3 years, the California market and the PUC and the CEC are going to be focused on buying flexibility. There's a lot of sources of flexibility. It could be conventional generators, it could be demand response, it could be other types of storage, and so forth. The challenge that CSP with thermal storage has is that you have to buy a big bunch of renewable energy with it. So if you've contracted for all the renewable energy you need, but now you need flexibility, CSP with thermal storage is sort of shut out of that market in a way. So what I see is that while California is figuring out the valuation of flexibility, thermal storage is probably going to be on the sidelines until the PUC or somebody raises the RPS requirement and the utilities have to re-enter the renewable market in a big way. And then it's a resource that has potentially nice features, as we've been discussing. I would say the one risk is that in the interim period, we will have over-contracted for flexibility. So if you look at the PUC mandate for other types of storage procurement that's going into play, there's a risk that CSP with thermal storage could get shut out of that. And that's 1,300 megawatts. That's probably not enough to solve all your flexibility needs, going to the high levels of penetration that we foresee, but it gives a running start to all the other types of solutions. So that's just, from the outside, it's hard to see how these regulatory policies and processes might advantage or disadvantage a particular resource, but that is one challenge that we definitely face in California.
Okay, thanks, Udi. Let's see if we have any questions. If anybody has a question, why don't you walk up to the mic and be prepared?
One basic thing that I really feel like we should mention is that, these studies that show the potential for CSP hybrid and other technologies are really just that, their potential, and we still have, from a utility perspective, we're still, until we see it, it's hard to believe that it will actually be there. And so I think that's one of the challenges of CSP thermal and any other innovative technology is, it has to be demonstrated. We have to see the benefits. We have to see how it plays into the market. And that utilities being very conservative, and SMUD is less conservative than many utilities, we need to see it. We need to see it demonstrated. And I think that's the primary challenge. SMUD is looking at other ways to meet our flexibility needs. So we're looking at pump storage, and that's a technology that's proven, and we actually have a resource that we can do pump storage in, and that's in our plans depending on cost and other factors. But CSP and thermal storage really needs to be proven in order to be accepted by utilities in a big way.
So I just want to put a little plug in here. There have been a lot of CSP plants built. Unfortunately, none of the CSP plants built in California have actually implemented thermal storage. Abengoa has a plant in Arizona. APS, the utility, the off-taker, was an integral part to that plant being built, and the plant is being used to dispatch, the intent of the plant is to dispatch solar to help meet their peak loads, including their winter load, starting early in the morning. There's the Crescent Dunes project in Nevada that also has thermal storage, and so it seems like sort of a missed opportunity, unfortunately, for California. We build a lot of CSP plants and they don't have storage, so hopefully we can find a way to correct that. Do we have any questions from the audience? Any final closing comments from our panel? Okay, well, I'd like to thank everybody for coming and joining the session this morning. I'd like to have a round of applause for our panel members and speakers. Right now is the next thing on the agenda is the networking break till 10:30, and that's up in the or down in the exhibit hall, I guess, or over in the exhibit hall. So thank you all for coming.
Oh.